question 50 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is the subjective parts of prudence, and I am Dr. Thibault. When looking at the subjective parts of prudence, we have introduced prudence itself in question 47, and then in question 48, we opened up the topic of the parts of prudence, and we've identified that there are three distinctive groupings of parts, the quasi-integral parts of justice, which are the necessary elements of prudence, and then we are looking at the subjective parts of prudence. Now, St. Thomas in Article 47 pointed out that these are like species. Right? These are species of prudence. So, like there's an ox and a lion are both part of the species of animals. These are species of prudence. So they are not dependent on each other. They are not parts that add up to the whole of prudence, but they are prudence themselves. Right? They are fully prudent in themselves, but they are distinct in their species. So when we look at the subjective parts of prudence, we go back to, this is a slide from question 48. I bring it up again because St. Thomas introduced it in 48, and now here we are looking at it specifically. The areas are military prudence, which is basically to govern an army. No offense to the Navy people out there, but St. Thomas said army. The domestic prudence, the governing of the family. Regnative prudence is governing of a king or kingdom, and political prudence is its subjects. That's the short version. We'll unfold these a bit more. When we talk about the regnative prudence, when we look at that, this term regnative is really archaic, right? It's a bit of an archaic term, but we can recognize some other words in regnative, like if anyone knows Latin, regina. Right? Basic Catholic Latin would have regina, queen. So in English, we have things like reign or regent. These are all terms which are applied to ruling. This is about governing. So regnative prudence is ruling prudence from the perspective of somebody who is reigning in some way. At the time of St. Thomas, this would have been the princes and kings. Today we might have presidents and dictators, but this is the same skill set, right, in terms of prudence, proper governance. Prudence is a virtue which is proper to the prince. Therefore, a special kind of prudence is regnative, according to Aristotle's writing on politics. Prudence governs and commands. Kind of what it's good at is commanding. Therefore, because it's good at governing and commanding, it's very appropriate for people who their position within the common good is to govern, right? It's nice to have the prudence to command well, but if it were if prudence were for me, I have nobody to govern. Right? I have nobody to command, so I could have the greatest command, but it's a command over only myself. Therefore, it's not the most useful to me. Versus king or queen or president, this would be very important because now they have a command, but their command is over millions of people, but perhaps, and it has a big effect on the common good, unlike my commands, which have very little effect on the common good. So that's why both Aristotle and St. Thomas have put prudence, principally, chiefly, bestly placed within this regnative power. The more universal the governance, the more perfect prudence is. In this sense, the king is better than the prince. The person who governs the kingdom is having prudence is more important than the person who governs the city being prudent. This is just having that person with the greatest effect needs it, the virtue the most, right? That's just kind of basic. Prudence and justice, both these two virtues, right? Prudence and justice, both cardinal virtues, belong most properly to the king, right? Same thing with justice. Right? I could be very good at giving proper judgments on people, but if I am not the prince, or the prince has not appointed me to be the judge, then my judgments are fairly useless, right? Uh, I could think I could judge better than the Supreme Court. Well, that's lovely, but um, the prudence I have making my determinations is kind of wasted because um, my judgments have no effect, right? They have no effect in the world except over me. So prudence and justice, right, both properly belong to the prince, right? This has the greatest effect, oh, greatest positive effect on the common good. So we're talking about virtues, prudence and justice, belong most properly. So when we look at the next type of prudence, we're looking at political prudence. Now this one is dealing with individuals, according to Aristotle's writing on Ethics, chapter 6. Um, so St. Thomas uses the word slaves and subjects, so I will use the term slaves and subjects. Slaves and subjects, in any sense, are moved by the command of others in such a way that they move themselves by free will. Now, St. Thomas points out here that irrational beings are set into motion by their mover. So we see this kind of practically within animals. Right? It's almost shocking, right? You see um, a young giraffe being born, they kind of drop all this distance, 6 feet from their mother's womb, and they're walking within a very short amount of time. In the meantime, human children take a year to walk, and the baby giraffe is walking within hours. So I know this is kind of a strange roundabout, but animals are moved in a special way by the mover, right? They're set into motion by their mover, which is God, and they just do what they're supposed to do. Right? They do it perfectly. Birds build nests without being taught. Animals do what animals do perfectly without any instruction, without any schools. They don't have to go to college. They don't need to be taught through complicated communications or books. They just know what they're supposed to do. In the meantime, human beings are not. Human beings, as rational beings, have to move themselves. Even a slave, as St. Thomas points out, ultimately must move themselves. People, even a slave is not moved by their master, but they have to still freely choose to move themselves because of free will. Therefore, this kind of political prudence is the ability to make proper uh, judgments, moral judgments about being governed, right? And St. Thomas and Aristotle give a very strong deference to obedience. Listen to your leaders. Uh, there's a practical element of this as well as a theological element. The theological element is that our leaders in some ways have been placed there by God, and they are accountable to God for their behavior, but we are accountable for our obedience. On a practical level, a society that has people who are, for the most part, obedient has, for the most part, stability. And a stable environment has greater peace and prosperity, which is better for the common good. People who are constantly in a state of rebellion are seldom enjoying life. You're not prospering when you're fighting. So, political prudence is the kind of virtue to be governed well, to be governed, not to govern well, but to be governed well. It's also, and this was brought up in question 48, I believe, and it was that even though a king has prudence kind of as a master craft, right, an expert person in prudence because they're using it to govern for the common good, still we have a handicraft version of prudence where, an example I gave before, a race car driver really knows how to drive a car. Right? They are a master at driving a car. In the meantime, I still can drive a car, right? I can still drive to the grocery store. I can drive to school. I can drive to where I need to go. I don't get into accidents. It works pretty well. So I am a driver in a handicraft way, in a domesticated way. I am a driver versus somebody like a race car driver who is a master driver, right? They have a mastercraft. Likewise, a king has a mastercraft at prudence, but I still can have a handicraft version of prudence for the governing of my own life, right? My own small circle. I can still have prudence. Which brings us to domestic prudence. So domestic prudence is prudence which belongs to household, family life. So the individual is part of a household. So it is the household. So is the household part of the city or kingdom. Should have been is not it. So part individual is to the household, and the household is to the city. Uh, they're distinct, right? So the individual prudence is political prudence, the household prudence is domestic prudence, and then the kingdom or the city is regnative prudence. So there's three different so far elements of species of prudence. Now, domestic prudence is distinct from the other two. St. Thomas is writing from a patriarchal society, so do with that what you will. But he says the father has in his household an authority like that of a king. ... But he has not the full power of the king. The father does not have the ability to perform, to commit somebody to the death penalty, for example. Father should not commit a member of his household to the death penalty, whereas a king could. And can wage war against another kingdom. A father cannot wage war against another household. Romeo and Juliet, perhaps, but that's not the proper role of a father. So governing a household, being a good father, being a good mother, is a particular set of prudence. I think any parent can tell you that there's a particular set skill and prudence in that, but it's different than governing a country, and it's different than governing yourself. It's a different skill set. Lastly, St. Thomas deals with military prudence. Military prudence in this section is perhaps maybe more of the more confusing of the four in terms of the way in which he writes this in his answer. But there's some great philosophy in there. So for the complexity of it, at least you get some good philosophy out of it. So St. Thomas points out that nature has, the divine law has set up nature. Nature has a twofold tendency. One to self-govern. This is kind of that political prudence. And the other one is to withstand outward assailants. So this is just part of nature, right? Anthropology, or even to other animals, right? So the first step of nature is the concupiscible, the seeking after what you desire. Which, if you think about a cow, it would be probably water and grass and shelter. get out of the sun and the rain. Right? These things that the animal desires are fine, therefore they're survival. As human beings, we have similar concupiscible desires. Some of our concupiscible desires are good, and some of them are bad. They are our desires, the things that we seek that give us pleasure and sustenance. Now, there are other parts of us that are the irascible. Some of that can be more of our stubbornness. Stubbornness can also be for the good or for the bad, right? To endure a little bit of pain walking through the desert, and you need to get water. It's the concupiscible, but you just want to lie down and give up. But your irascible powers keep you walking even though you have no more strength left. Uh, this is irascible is to do something difficult. So the second part of nature, that irascible appetite, those irascible powers, these are necessary within military prudence. To do something difficult is synonymous with the military. It's not something easy, or we would all be soldiers. But soldiers are special. They're particularly trained to do something difficult. And their prudence exists for the common good. There's a communal aspect of this irascible. Right? It's not just one person doing something difficult. It's a collection of people doing something difficult together. There's a communal aspect of that. And if you want, hundreds of or thousands of people to do something difficult together, it needs to be coordinated with prudence. Right? If you think back to military battles that seem almost impossible, um, they only had the success that they had because they were properly executed. Right? They were properly set forth in a communal way, right? In a collective way. It wasn't 1,000 soldiers just going crazy and killing anyone, right? It was organized, it was planned, it was ordered, there was direction, it was command, it was executed. Right? This is all dealing with proper prudence, leadership. And St. Thomas, in his response to objection 3, says execution of military service belongs to fortitude, right, strength, but the direction, especially insofar as it concerns the commander in chief, belongs to prudence. Right? And the leader of the military, courage is important, yeah, but they're probably behind a desk somewhere making the decision. Uh, and that's fine that they're behind a desk making a decision, but what's commanded from them is not courage, but prudence. You have an end in mind, and prudence, it says, what is the proper means to achieve the end, right? What is the proper way? What is the proper action to achieve the end? So if the end goal of war is peace and liberty, right? What is the proper means for achieving that? So that's what is needed, and that is all found within prudence, military prudence. So in conclusion, the four species that we are looking at of prudence, the subjective parts, are regnative, the prudence of the king, a leader, a governor, president, political prudence, which is that prudence needed by the subjects of a society in order to be properly governed. Domestic prudence is the prudence needed for the operation of a household or a family. Military prudence is how to properly execute good communal prudence in terms of uh, creating military outcomes in a good way. Uh, and these four do not deal with uh, the prudence that's dedicated to individuals, which we covered in question 47. So just individual prudence of just individuals, right? Not in terms of not even political prudence, which is like how do you act as an individual in accordance to living in a society, but just in terms of individual decisions, that was already covered in question 47, and Thomas points that out in the introduction here. Okay, so next we'll move on to more prudence, but that's it for this time.